Falcons, it's McKenna again, and it's time for another edition of Tune In Tuesday. Today, we're going to learn tips for virtual interviews and strategies for making a positive impression. We are so lucky to have Renee and Amelia as our guests. Both have deep connection to UW River Falls. Amelia used to teach in our marketing communications program, and Renee is a marketing communications alum. They are energetic, passionate, and they want to help our students achieve their full potential. So let's get started.
Hey everybody, welcome to Tune In Tuesday. We are so thrilled to be here today to share tons of value about interviewing. I'm Renee Frey, expert recruiter, coach, and author, and we have...
Hi everyone, my name is Dr. Amelia Reigstad, and I'm an effective communication consultant and coach.
And fun fact, I am a former alum. I'm not going to tell you the year I graduated. And Amelia...
I am a former faculty, so I taught in the Marcom program for 5 years. So go Marcomers! Woo-hoo! All right, we're going to get started, and Renee is going to kick it off with first impressions.
First impressions are so important. First and foremost, the quote from Andrew Grant is totally true. You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So what does that mean? You want to look good. You want to make sure your nonverbals are positive, that you're smiling, that you have upright posture, and that you look totally eager. So that includes what you're wearing, how you're presenting yourself, and how you're communicating. So another thing I'll add is make sure you're nice to everyone you encounter. So the second your car hits the parking lot, that's when the interview starts. When you walk into the building, the receptionist or the security officer that greets you, they are definitely taking in things about your background and personality, because I guarantee the interview team is asking them how they were treated by you when you're going in for an interview.
Yeah, absolutely. Those first impressions are so important, and that really links to your differentiating factors. So really give thought to asking yourself, what makes you unique? How are you going to set yourself apart from the competition? So did you study abroad as part of your time at the RIB? Do you speak 3 languages? Were you the star football player? What is your differentiating factor that's going to make you stand out amongst all the different people that are applying for those same jobs as you?
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about interview do's, and then Renee's going to talk a little bit about interview don'ts. So interviews can be nerve-wracking, right? You've spent all this time building up your career and your education at River Falls, but now you're probably starting to apply for internships and maybe that first job. So some things that I want you to keep in mind from an interview perspective is, make sure that you've got really good eye contact, okay? Like Renee said, a good firm handshake. Now, of course, we're living during a global pandemic, so if you do have the opportunity to interview face-to-face, like, do the little elbow bump, a little dance sometimes people have been doing too, like some kind of intro dance that I've heard, but make sure that you've got eye contact, that you're happy to be there. Try not to be nervous. I know that can be really challenging. Sit forward within, so make sure that you're engaged with the person that you're interacting with. Have some really good posture, like put your shoulders back and sit up straight. All those little things that you need to think about, really does get noticed within interviews. Making sure that you're dressing appropriately. So again, depending on maybe the industry that you're applying for, even if they are considered business casual, which a lot of organizations and companies are these days, always put your best foot forward and go up a level. Make sure that you look, as best as you can during that day. How about, Renee, some don'ts? What are some things that we should really not do within interviews?
Yeah, so some don'ts going on the clothing theme. Don't wear wrinkled clothes. Make sure your clothes are clean, they're free of stains. So break out the iron the day before if you have wrinkles. Make sure there's no cat hair, dog hair. So you got to take the lint roller to make sure you're presentable. And then I tell everyone, don't chew gum Don't wear cologne or perfume. Some people are really sensitive to smells. And I had an example one time where a candidate wore the cologne of the interviewer's ex-boyfriend, and yet he didn't get the job. So you don't know what kind of preconceived notions about cologne or smells. So,
so on that note, then make sure you shower.
Yeah, make sure. Well, that's a basic. But some other things, you don't want to bring notes of your experiences. What you want to bring is your resume, and you can bring a pad of paper or a portfolio to take notes, or to have questions that you have written down in advance for the interviewers, but you don't want to be taking notes and looking at your notes during the interview. You've got to have everything memorized and present yourself in a great manner. And that leads into only speaking positively about your current employer and your previous employers. Nobody wants to hire a negative Nelly. So there's a lot of ways you can spin things, but you've got to keep everything positive.
And that's such a good point too, because even like Western Wisconsin, Twin Cities, again, depending on the industry that you might be going into, the industries are small. And with social media and LinkedIn, like you'd be surprised, how many people know one another. And so staying positive and not, talking negatively about past employers is absolutely key to being in a successful interview.
Absolutely.
All right. So Renee, why don't you talk a little bit about mindset? Because this is really important, as part of interviewing as well.
Yeah. So I always tell everybody that the morning, when you wake up, the morning of your interview, you got to tell yourself, I am going to get a job offer from ABC company. And you want to stand proud. I call it the power pose. You stand with your arms big and bright and you just breathe in and just tell yourself, I am going to get a job offer from ABC company today. Because that's like what the Olympic athletes do. They visualize themselves in the interview. Actually, they're answering the questions. They're doing all of that, and it actually helps. Now, are you going to get a job offer from the first interview? No, but guess what? When you tell yourself you're going to, chances are you're going to get called back for that second interview. So really give attention to your mindset, and you do that prep in advance. Imagine yourself nailing the interview and having a great time doing it.
And I think too, like going off of that mindset is, even the night before, like give some thought to maybe like how your morning would be, like the morning of your interview. Are you going to eat a good breakfast? Like maybe you typically don't eat breakfast. Well, maybe today you do. You want to have that energy. Do you like to do yoga? Is there something that could keep you calm, prior to the interview? So giving thought to some of those things that you could even do before to make sure that, you've got that great mindset going into the interview.
Absolutely.
Well, let's talk a little bit then, Renee, about virtual interview. So how can someone make a good positive impression and be personable during a phone interview?
My biggest tip is for people to stand up, because your voice, you sound more positive, you just sound more engaged, more vibrant when you're standing up. And I tell everyone you should be able to ace a phone interview because you can use it to your advantage. Have your notes all around you. Take advantage of that, because down the road, when you have the in-person interview or the video interview, you're not going to have that luxury. So take advantage of that. And people can really hear you and your nonverbals over the phone. And you might think I'm crazy, but I've been interviewing people for 2 decades and I can hear those nonverbals over the phone. So make sure you're smiling throughout. And it might feel super awkward, but I'm telling you, if you do it, they can hear it in your voice.
Absolutely. And I think too, being able to, try to give thought to slowing down, because nerves can still be noticed on the phone too. So even if you have to just pause, take a breath, and then continue on with your thought. Sometimes those little moments of silence are okay, if you need that. So going off of those kind of moments of silence, some questions that the Career Center has had before, what are some quiet areas on campus to go to complete your virtual interview. So from what we've heard, I mean, campus is quite quiet right now, so you might be able to find a variety of spots for your interviews. But the Career Services Office does have, I believe, 3 different interview rooms that I'm sure that you could book ahead of time and actually have your virtual interview take place there. Renee, any thoughts about navigating poor internet connection?
Yeah, with internet, when you have an interview, you got to make sure that the only thing that is pulling the bandwidth is you on the video if you're doing video interview. So make sure that if your roommates or your partners, make sure they're not streaming Netflix, make sure their devices are all off, because we've got a lot of things that are connected in our homes now. So if you're doing it in the home, in your house or in the dorm, you've got to take that into consideration and plan and communicate with those around you and say, hey, this is really important to me. My interview is from 11 to 11:30. I'm going to need you to turn off your devices so that I can make sure my bandwidth is as strong as it can be. But if you do have poor internet connection and issues do come up, be very flexible and just be honest. And they'll typically be able to see it on Zoom because we can see with the levers who's having bad internet connection. And I had one individual this week who his audio kept going out like every 5 minutes and we couldn't figure it out, but he just apologized and troubleshooted it, got back on where he could hear me, and we just kept going. So it is kind of frustrating, so just make sure you apologize and that you're doing everything you can. And if it is really, really bad, then offer to reschedule for another time.
Yeah, great point. Because I think too, I mean, we're all living in this environment right now where everything is virtual for the most part, but unfortunately, it still goes back to making that first impression. And even though it might not be your fault, and I don't want to make you all nervous by that, but there is kind of a bit of expectation there too that I think we need to be cognizant of. So I love what Renee says about, these things do happen. Do your best to make sure that people aren't using the bandwidth and not watching Netflix and such. And then of course, apologize if, something happens. And then maybe you do have to reschedule. I mean, if you're not able to hear somebody or things are cutting out, it's probably best to, reach out to them after and try to reschedule something.
Yep. And I would do a trial run through. So a lot of companies use different web technology. Some use WebEx, some use Microsoft Teams, some use Zoom. Yeah. If you can find somebody in your network that has access to one of those, do a trial run with them so your audio is set appropriately, your video is working, all of that. So definitely do a trial run in advance.
That's great. And then actually too, going off of that into this next question about what should I have on my background. Now, I'm not a tech expert either. So I know that the RIV has branded Zoom backgrounds that you can use, but I've also heard that the Zoom backgrounds do actually use up a lot of the bandwidth. So keep that in mind too. Obviously you can see I'm in my office right now at home, Renee's at her studio with the beautiful prints behind her. So you don't necessarily have to have a background if that makes you nervous about, using the bandwidth and stuff, but making sure that you've got a decent background behind you.
Yeah, don't set up your camera with your bed in the back. So make sure that, and you're gonna have to make sure the lighting is adequate. So whatever time your interview is scheduled for, you're gonna wanna test to see what kind of lighting there is. And we're in the Midwest, so sometimes it's cloudy, so there will be some variables, but you wanna make sure you have great lighting so you're well lit. I know you can get ring lights to help. I have one in front of me, but you really wanna set it up and have someone be able to see through your video what's behind you, because they will judge you on what's behind you, and you don't want to have a big hot mess, messy shelves, or your messy kitchen or your bed. You want to have a nice background. So
and for the love, do not sit on your bed. Do not sit on your bed for an interview. Please.
Absolutely.
All right. So what Renee and I thought we would do is kind of go through a little mock interview session. So I'm going to be the employer and Renee is going to be the interviewee. And I'm going to ask her a couple questions. Find my notes here. just to give you some insight of how maybe to answer some of those tough questions that you could get. So Renee, what are one of your opportunities or areas you are working on to improve?
Great question, Amelia. I am working on improving my patience. So I'm an extremely impatient person. And when I'm given goals at work, I like to get them done and achieve them as fast as possible. But there are times when, if you're working in a collaborative team, that I have to take a step back and realize everyone around me may not be as driven as I am. And so I need to pause, make sure everyone's on the same page, set the expectations, kind of sit back a little bit, make sure I'm being patient so that we can move forward and achieve our goals.
Great, thank you. So could you tell me about a time that you successfully dealt with conflict?
Yeah, great question. So when I worked at Target Corporation, there was an individual, a peer that I had worked with, and someone had shared some misinformation that she said that I had said something, which created this big, massive conflict. And so at the time, I was recruiting for merchandisers at the time, and I had a team of people. So there were 4 of us responsible for this. And the people that, we'll just call her Jane. So Jane, when I heard this information, I was really concerned because these 4 people that I was collaborating with to hire all these buyers, they were critical on this project. And if she had said something that was misinforming them, I wanted to make sure I nipped it in the bud right away, because I am all about integrity. Integrity is my number one. What I say I do, and I always follow through. So what I did was I approached her immediately after her cubicle was kitty corner to me. And I sat down and I asked her if she had a minute. Well, I could tell I kind of caught her off guard, and I'm really direct in dealing with conflict. I just want to hash it out, communicate, figure it out, move on. And I could tell, I asked her, I said, there was something that I heard that you had said, and I just want to address it with you. Well, you could tell her guard went up tremendously. And so I knew that this was not the right time. So I said, you know what, I'm sorry. I just tried to get you off guard or talk to you right now. How about, would it make sense if we scheduled time, if I put some time on your calendar next week? And she said, sure. So I scheduled the time on Jane's calendar, and then we actually left the work area and went down to the cafeteria to have a discussion. And I walked through what I had heard that she had said, and I said, you know what, I don't know if it's true, but I want to talk to you about it, because my number one is integrity, and I don't ever want anyone saying anything bad about me, because that jeopardizes how we collaborate and how we work as a team. And so she never admitted it, but you could tell that how I was communicating with her, and I was trying to communicate indirectly. So I was asking her, help me understand how we can move forward together, and help me understand how we make sure this doesn't happen again in the future. So we came to some agreements, and she, though, did thank me for coming to her directly, which I appreciate. And so after that, we were able to move forward. Now, I did have to go back to those other 4 individuals that we were collaborating with to achieve these buyer hiring goals. And I talked and sat down with every single one of them individually. And a lot of them knew that I wouldn't say something like that, which was reassuring to me. But I was really upset because I never want anyone to jeopardize my career or my reputation. And so I had addressed it with her, I addressed it with the 4 individuals, and then I was able to move on.
Thank you for that. So everyone, see too, like there's gonna be some trickier questions that you could potentially have. So, giving thought to when you have dealt with conflict. I mean, Renee, you are an expert in interviewing and recruiting. So my assumption is that the majority of employers do ask some type of question like this.
Yes, absolutely. And, a lot of times they even ask a time when you failed. And you have to have a response for all of these. There is no, oh, that's never happened to me. You have to pull an example out. Now, I want to go back to the first question, the weakness or area of opportunity. If you could see what I did there, I recommend everybody use something that you're working on that can be seen as a strength. So a lot of my go-tos are, I'm impatient, I work quickly, I have really high expectations. Those can be seen as strengths because who doesn't want to hire people that get work done quickly, who hit goals and, who have high expectations. Everyone wants to hire those people. So that's a little trick for you to not say, oh, like a lot of times I see students say, oh, I'm a perfectionist. No one wants to hear that one. They want to hear what you're working on and use strengths, because then they're like, oh, she's amazing.
Good. That's great. Okay, everyone. So going off of that, Renee is going to talk a little bit here about some topics that, you really shouldn't be asked questions related to.
Yeah. And this gets where I see these happening. Most people don't do it on purpose, but when you're starting a conversation with someone, and if you bring up, oh yeah, I had to drop off my daughter at school, or, then sometimes they may ask you questions about your family, and technically they're not supposed to. So when you're making small talk, just, keep that in mind, but you shouldn't be asked questions related to how old are you, your race, your country or national origin, or where you were born, gender or sex, religion, if you have a disability, your marital or family status or pregnancy. Now, if you do get asked some of these questions, which it does happen time to time, just politely say, I'm not going to answer that question because that's a prohibited question. And then they'll probably be like, oh my gosh, they probably they didn't mean to do it. And they're like, oh my gosh, they're going to feel super bad. But don't ever feel like you have to answer those questions. And I want to share, there is some legislation that started, I want to say in 2018, and some states, it's illegal for them to ask how much money you're making. So, I thought it would be widespread across the United States by now, and it's not. Right. Minnesota and Wisconsin are not in that bucket, but Washington State, I think Oregon, Utah. So you got to make sure. And if you're applying, if I live in Wisconsin, but I'm applying for a job in Washington, they can't ask me. So it doesn't matter where you live, it's where the job is going to be. So just keep that in mind. It's called the salary ban.
Interesting. Okay. Cool. So we're going to start to wrap up here, but some key points to, doing your research before your interview is really, really important. So I would suggest, if you can, if it isn't communicated to you as part of setting up the interview, I feel, and Renee, you can certainly, tell me if I'm wrong on this with your expertise, but it's okay to ask who would be interviewing you. So
absolutely.
Okay.
You have to know in order to do your research on those people on LinkedIn and, see if you have any commonalities or common connections. Absolutely. Everyone should provide you a list of names and titles of who you're interviewing with.
Yeah. So if you don't get that, it's okay for you to ask, and then go to town on doing your research, right? They're Googling you and checking you out on LinkedIn, so you might as well do it to them too. Try to find something that maybe is a little bit different. That can help you then pose a list of questions that you want to turn around and ask the organization towards the end of your interview. So making sure that you've done your research is really, really critical.
Yeah, and I would encourage people, when you're applying at a company, they will ask, why do you want to come work for us? So when you're doing your research, I recommend getting into the nitty gritty. Go to their webpage, read every single page, watch every single video on there, and that's going to give you information for the questions that you're going to ask the interviewing team as well, to make sure it's a good fit for you.
Right. So then maybe you want to continue on with how interviewing is a two-way street.
Yeah, so interviewing is like dating. I'm interviewing you as much as you're interviewing me. And so you have to make sure that you get your questions answered to make sure it's the right environment, the right hiring leader, the right place for you, the right culture. This is imperative. So you really do want to sit down and think about the people that are interviewing you and their titles, and what would be the key questions relevant to them that they would be able to answer for you. So I've listed here some of my favorites. My favorite of all time is to ask your hiring manager, who would be your hiring manager, what keeps you up at night. That question will tell you exactly what is most important to that leader right there. And it's gonna really open up your eyes, because then you'll see what's most important going on that team right now. Another question is, what does success look like in this role? You want to start to get a flavor of what the actual expectations are going to be, to see if you are going to be able to deliver on those expectations. And then I love asking, why did you join this company? What drew you here? It's awesome to hear those things. And then what keeps you there is another great question too, because it'll uncover things about the culture of how they retain their employees and why people love working there.
Yeah, and I think too, going off of that is, even in my previous faculty role, like I know how eager students are, especially as they're leading up to graduation, to get that first job. But like Renee said, I mean, you truly are interviewing them as much as they are interviewing you, because you also want to be happy in your job, right? You want to be able to work in an environment where you agree with the workplace culture and it's a good fit for you. So it is important to ask these types of questions, and that goes back again to really doing your research.
Definitely.
All right, everybody. So just as we're going to wrap up here, the real important bit, is follow up, and thank yous, and more thank yous. So something that I had always recommended when I taught at River Falls, I was teaching one of the Marcom Senior SEM capstone classes, is to write a personal thank you note and pop it in the mail. To the extent, a trick that I had always followed was I would have those thank you cards already addressed, the envelope addressed, and I would give thought in my interviews of something that maybe stuck out that I could then personally write a note as a thank you. And literally I'd be leaving the interview and I'd be popping those thank you notes in the mail. Granted, we are in an environment right now where not many people are actually at the office. Everybody is working from home. So although that kind of shifts our perspectives on sending thank you cards or thank you notes, it is still absolutely critical to send a thank you email. You should never leave an interview without doing so. What do you think, Renee? Thoughts on that?
Absolutely. And I would actually tie a time goal to it. You want to get those thank yous out 24 hours after that interview. And if you leave without their contact information or their emails, and a lot of stuff is going virtual, right? You have to write down, one of the questions you need to ask is, what is your email address so I can follow up, and they'll give it to you. Or use the resource, whoever's been your contact at that company, ask them, can you please send me a list of all the interviewers' emails so I can follow up? So ask those questions, and yes, definitely follow up. And thank yous is one area where if you mess up a question, like you bombed the question, you can fix it in your thank you email. You can say, you know what? I realized I didn't address your question of blah, 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 and I put a little bit more time into it, and I want you to know that I've done blah, 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 and share that example. You can resurrect a mistake that you made in the interview that way as well.
That's great. All right, everyone. So we hope that information was helpful for you in regards to interviewing. So connect with us. All of our information is here. You can reach out to us in a variety of different ways, where we'd be welcome to answer any other questions that you might have as part of this. So thank you, everybody. It's great to be back at the Rev. Have some very fond memories of my time as a faculty member there.
Yeah, thanks everyone. I hope this helps you nail your next interview.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.